morning, everybody. Sorry I'm a bit late. I have a bit of just recovering from a flu. But I really wanted to come. I was fascinated to hear of John Doyle's work, and I'm very pleased to get the invitation today to speak to you about technologies for enabling deep adaptation to our climate chaos. And I want to just get a check-in on who's in the room. Hands up if you work in or with the European Commission in some way. I think nearly all hands go up. Okay, thank you. Hands up if you think that you might be in denial about our climate predicament in some way. It's okay, the camera's on me, not you, so... Okay. Hands up if you think that climate change will disrupt your way of life in your lifetime. Okay, so that's, I think, nearly all, maybe over 90% or more of hands have gone up. So, so I want to speak to that because I realize that it's very difficult to move from that awareness into action within our roles and within our lives, within the system that we participate in and have to participate in every day. If this building was on fire now, we wouldn't be urgently looking for a fire safety consultant to tell us how we might manage fire safety risk in future. We'd be looking for firefighters and guidance for how to get the hell out of here. And so the climate emergency requires firefighters, not fire safety consultants. And way too much of our work now is still within that paradigm of how do we reduce risk? How do we, work out how to slowly change in future? It's not that we can smell smoke. The flames are now rising around us. And we've really seen that with how the chaotic weather last year affected harvests in the West. You've heard a bit about that. So that's over 20% decline of grains and root vegetables in many, if not most, European countries. The climate models that experts are using see 2018 as anomalous, but those models are changing and they're also having to use observations of what's been happening in the last few years, observations which were not predicted from those models. And of course, I think also, if you heard, our direction of travel is really not good. Has anyone mentioned that we just passed 415 parts per million? I mean, that's just a number, but we haven't seen carbon concentrations like that since 4.5 million years ago, according to geologists. The Pliocene era, when temperatures were up to 4 degrees higher than today, and sea levels were, different scientists have different views, but up to 40 meters higher than today. And I mean, what does that mean for us? And why don't we have that already now? That's because of the lag of the warming effect from carbon in our atmosphere. And that's because oceans have absorbed about 90% of all the additional energy that's being trapped by those carbon gases. But just like those of you who did get coffees, you know that if you don't drink it, it's going to get cold. The energy dissipates from the liquid, so there will be an equalizing over time. So we've got a huge amount of warming already locked in for our future. And of course, we've seen what's going to happen, what's happening in the Arctic. So there was a few scientists, people like Professor Wadhams, who were ringing the alarm bells and saying that if the Arctic goes, we'll see global temperature rise quite quickly, equivalent to about half of all anthropogenic emissions ever, completely blowing out the targets that we've agreed out the window. And him saying that we may see an ice-free Arctic in the summer in a few years. There was a few people, but what we're seeing is increasingly more and more scientists saying the same thing. So there was a paper in the American Geophysical Union's journal, which came out in February, that said it's quite likely we could see an ice-free Arctic summer by 2030. And then, of course, there are all the concerns about what that might do to methane, both on the Arctic seafloor, but also increasingly around the permafrost. And you've also already heard today about the IPCC saying we've got now it's 11 years to cut carbon by about 50%, so over 5% a year, and we're heading in the wrong direction. The Global Carbon Project said that last year, 2018, global carbon emissions, 2.7% increase, the highest increase ever. So for me, that's kind of stuff that you can see all that. It sounds scary, but it doesn't take away a sense of agency necessarily in stopping a crisis. But for me, when I looked at sea level rise, so sea level rise it's bad in itself if you're for cities and for agricultural lands and for small island states. But the particular thing with sea level rise is an indicator of what's happening in the whole system. And the World Meteorological Organization in March confirmed what some independent research institutes were finding, which is that global sea level rise is definitely non-linear now. It's speeding up. And so that's an indicator that climate change as a whole is speeding up, and therefore it suggests that these self-reinforcing feedback loops, which we've all heard about, some of them are now happening, and that means that the future of our climate is not in our control. And it doesn't mean we don't do what we can to slow it. So it doesn't mean that mitigation goes out the window. It doesn't mean that drawdown isn't massively important and restoring ecosystems to do that. But it means that it's beyond our control and we have to have difficult conversations about what's ahead, whatever we do. And yeah, we can't find any solace in the idea this is just a few alarmist scientists. You just heard from Alison about a recent report about collapse of biodiversity threatening the future of our food supply. And also this week, the UNISDR, their report on global risks is going to be sounding the alarm for potential multi-breadbasket failures and implications for human society as a result. So this is now very much a mainstream thing, and yet we find it very difficult to know what does that mean that we do day to day in our jobs and in our personal lives. So that meaningful dialogue requires a different starting point, recognizing that our climate emergency isn't a pollution problem, it's a political one, it's not a technological one, it's a psychological one. And then, of course, once you've got... Oh, and I would also say, it's not like, I know a lot of people are coming to this topic new, but we've been trying to do something about this for decades. 1987 was the first time that the UN General Assembly agreed that climate change is real. We're causing it and it's a problem. Lots of people have been doing a lot of stuff since then. We have to recognize that this is not addressed credibly, responsibly now in a reformist way. We have to approach it in a revolutionary way. And what does that mean? Well, hopefully it means bold, peaceful action, but I think it does mean challenging and upending the systems of power that have sort of based on this system and are maintaining it. And that's a real challenge to people, those of us who work within current systems of power. So, I'm going to talk a bit about technology. And some people look at technology and see it as a solution, and other people like to castigate all forms of technology as being the cause of our problems, and that we should avoid sort of techno-hubris. And so they criticize all forms of geoengineering, for example. Now, my view is that we're in such a crisis that we need to look at everything on a case-by-case basis, not in ways that try and affirm our view of reality. And adaptation to climate change is a huge topic that's going to touch on all kinds of areas, and therefore technologies will be relevant to all of that. And I'm still learning. And it's why I'm really happy to be here today and for the afternoon as well, where we're going to go deeper on this. But before I explain a little bit about what I mean by deep adaptation, I want to share a few ideas where I think technology could help. First, then, there's food and water. We need to adapt our agriculture to a future where rain-fed grain production at scale isn't any longer guaranteed. So there's much we could do with simple tech, from new reservoirs, irrigated potato farms and greenhouses. Hydroponics and urban farming technologies are also important. There's also the opportunity to transition to more agroecological approaches to normal farming. Obviously, replacing beef and dairy farming is essential. When I say replacing, remember I said a revolutionary approach? We have to think about how market mechanisms have been failing us. We have to realize that difficult decisions need to be taken, and there will be pushback. We'll need people to, not cattle, to be eating grains in future if we're going to have problems with food supply. We're going to need to diversify food sources and relocalize. So we're going to need innovations, information tech that helps communities connect with each other and organize better local production and consumption so it has a lower carbon footprint than it would do at the moment. Basically, I'm thinking you can't insure the human race against this with a piece of paper, a new insurance policy. It's going to be done through securing food, water, and community solidarity. So secondly, we need to pull back from how certain technologies are increasing our vulnerability. So ahead of any actual food shortages causing mayhem in the West, we could see the financial sector panicking and imploding our credit and monetary systems. We're increasingly reliant on global systems for even locally produced items. And those global systems require continual economic expansion. So it's only a matter of time before they experience some more significant shock. And unless we address that vulnerability, the day is going to come where in our local communities we can't buy a locally baked loaf of bread because perhaps there's been a collapse of some reinsurance company in Frankfurt, and that's had knock-on effects and taken away our ability just to go chink and buy it. This is insane that we're actually building up this ever greater vulnerability. So I think answers can be found in information technology, not necessarily just going back to cash, where we're actually going to look to try and basically create payment system security, and including alternative and locally issued currencies. But these technologies are going to need to be open and flexible. We don't want to create new fiefdoms and new means of rent-taking by speculators. Third, technology needs to be made more available where it's desperately needed to reduce suffering and deepen adaptation. So much of technology, as I said, is private property, and its use depends on the discretion of the owner. One area where opening up is urgent, I think, is to support what you could call mass psychological adaptation to our climate tragedy. Because awareness of our situation is provoking many difficult emotions, as I'm sure you've all experienced in past months and years, in yourself and in talking with your families and colleagues. We're going to continue living with loss, grief, sadness, confusion, fear, panic, anger. And I think infotech could help us in terms of bringing various kinds of psychotherapeutic services to each of us. So for meditation, I currently use a Headspace app on my phone. And that's nice for me, and it's nice for the guy who created it and his millionaire backers. But there need to be free services of similar quality. And there need to be free online training and peer mentoring services to help our teachers, counsellors, journalists, government officials and others with the difficult emotions they're going to experience in this agenda and in making really tough decisions in response to this agenda. There's going to be a lot to do to spread insights on how to reduce harm and help each other, and I think we should be using the latest information technology to do that while we still have them. Fourth, and now the controversial bit, we need technology to save the Arctic ice sheet right now. If it disappears, then the change in Northern Hemisphere weather is going to be catastrophic for our grain harvests. And so it will also risk mass release of methane. Now, we don't know, and we'll never know ahead of time exactly how much methane could be destabilized or when, but of course, its release would be a matter of potential human extinction. So we should try to cool the Arctic immediately. And the best method I've learned about is marine cloud brightening, which would pump seawater from the Arctic Ocean up pipes and into the sky and spray it to increase and brighten clouds over the Arctic, which would cool the Arctic. Now, we don't know for certain how it would work, but we need to test it and test it now. Now, at present, I'm not in favour of any other form of geoengineering that I've looked at. Given how it affects air currents, I'm not in favour of marine cloud brightening in anywhere other than the poles. But I should repeat again, I think our situation requires neither techno-hubris nor technophobia, and not looking at any of these things purely from what kind of story do I want to tell about reality to make myself feel better as my sense of belonging in a world that's progressing falls apart. Fifth, we need technology for helping people connect with others who are waking up to our climate tragedy ahead of the wider awakening in society. The idea that it's too late to stop a breakdown in our way of life is still taboo, and probably will remain so for a few more years. I don't think everyone's like people in the room. Maybe something's massively changed, but I think this is somewhat a self-selecting group. And it's why I launched with colleagues the Deep Adaptation Forum. It's an international space for people who want to explore what they can do in their profession to promote collapse readiness. I describe deep adaptation as our personal and collective preparations for a collapse or a breakdown in our society. And I call it deep because it's not premised on the idea that our current society is going to continue with a few adaptive measures. I believe it's too late for that. So people who adopt this deep adaptation approach do not necessarily believe collapse is inevitable, but they feel it's important to work as if it's coming. And for some, of course, they see it as already unfolding and just not distributed evenly. Now, ahead of this afternoon's session, I've been asked to describe a little bit more about what I mean by the deep adaptation approach, so that we'll be able to brainstorm on the range of ways that technology could help. So very quickly then, deep adaptation is just really a set of 4 questions to help people explore what we might think and do and stop thinking and doing once we think that a breakdown or collapse in our society is likely, inevitable, or already unfolding. The first question is, how do we keep what we really want to keep? It's all about resilience, the capacity to adapt to changing circumstances so as to survive with our valued norms and behaviours. And much of what I've just described earlier, things like preparing for financial shocks, are in this area of resilience. A second question to ask is, what do we need to let go of in order to not make matters worse? And that question helps us explore what I call relinquishment, where people and communities are going to let go of certain assets and behaviours and beliefs, where retaining them would make matters worse. Examples can include withdrawing from coastlines, shutting down vulnerable industrial facilities, and giving up expectations for certain types of consumption. And of course, there's going to be the psychological challenge of how to help people who experience dread, grief, and confusion around our situation and around the loss of things which were part of their identity before. So much of what I described earlier about technologies to help us with mindfulness and with relating with each other and supporting each other, I think is in that realm of relinquishment. The third question I ask is, what can we bring back to help us with the coming difficulties and tragedies? And this is restoration. It's restoration of attitudes and approaches to life and organisation that our hydrocarbon-fueled civilization eroded. And examples can include rewilding landscapes so they provide more ecological benefits and require less management, or changing diets back to match the seasons, rediscovering non-electronically powered forms of play and fun, and increasing community engagement, productivity and support. The fourth question I invite us all to consider is, what can I make peace with to lessen suffering? What and whom? So as this is what I call reconciliation. Reconciliation with our mistakes, regrets, with death, our own death and others. And some would add reconciliation with more of an existential question, our notion of God or spirit or the divine. And we can also seek to be part of reconciliation between peoples with different political persuasions, religions, nations, genders, classes, and so on. And this is kind of an inner deep adaptation to climate collapse that I think is necessary, or we will risk, I think, descending into othering and violence. And so for me, what I loved about Extinction Rebellion is not necessarily, its tactics were fascinating, but it's actually behind-the-scenes processes. People come to the Extinction Rebellion with often quite a great deal of fear. And once they're there, they find love. They find a sense of purpose and solidarity. You may see the people being arrested, but next to them there'll be a legal advisor. Waiting for them at the police station will be someone who's gone and bought a whole bunch of snacks for them when they're released. And there's a whole support network, because some people will suddenly not be seeing their kid for 24 hours and need babysitting. There's a whole system around it. We're providing all manner of ways for people to engage and support each other. And so that's fascinating to see. They really, really believe that we need to prefigure the way we wish to be in crisis through their actions now. Since last year in July, I've sought to have conversations based on the deep adaptation perspective. I realize it's not an easy task because we easily fall back into conversations about preventing climate chaos. And we easily fall back into the solace of a hope that things aren't so bad. So I think it's important that, John, you've organised today, because I think we need to support each other in staying with what are very difficult conversations which also trigger difficult emotions. Because I think the more creative we are from that new place, then the more likely we can make the best of a worsening situation and reduce harm. And for me, that's where my sense of purpose now lies, somewhere in that space. Thank you.